Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all tech topics that are smart home, home automation, home security, and console game related. Today is Friday, August 28th, 2020. I hope all of you are planning to have a great weekend. I know that I am. Can't wait till the weekend comes. On today's podcast, I want to kind of dive deep into a whole host of, I call it a tech smorgasbord of topics that I think will be interesting to many of you because several of the topics are in the news. And without any further ado, I want to introduce a good friend of mine, Rob Pegoraro, the longtime tech contributor to USA Today, Fast Company. You've read his work in a number of other well-known news sites and publications. Good morning, Rob. How are you? And how is the morning treating you?
Morning's treating me all right. Been able to catch up on some emails and don't owe copy to anyone right away, which is a nice break from how this week has gone.
Right. We haven't spoken probably about a couple of months. We did a podcast back in, I want to say June or July. How's the summer been treating you so far? Are you surviving? And
it's going on. I'm glad you mentioned the date because honestly, the days do sort of blend into one another. I do appreciate two things in my life, two constants each week. One is the food section comes on Wednesdays, so that helps me tell things apart. And trash day is Thursday, so I've got that bit of structure in my life.
I find I'm running out of things to see on Netflix and Hulu. That's when you've been in your house too long. Is that you start watching series over and over again. And I love Mad Men. If I watch Mad Men continuously for the fourth time, even that gets a bit old. So I'm looking forward to all of this craziness to get over soon, and hopefully it will be over and not too distant, the distant future, but who knows?
It'd be nice.
But actually on that topic though, let's talk a little bit about work from home because as a tech writer, you've been working at your home for many, many, many years. So a little bit about working from home. And
I thought I did, but this year has been a learning process.
I'm sure you've gotten your share of phone calls from friends and colleagues about, hey, I'm working at home. My company has sent me home to work. What kind of things can I do to make the work from home situation a bit more bearable? So do you have any tips that you might want to share with the audience?
So the big thing that took me a while to sort of grasp was basically how bad the cameras that are built into computers are. Right now, I've got this iMac, which has got the 720p EyeSight camera. That's been the same hardware Apple's had for, I guess, this entire century, literally.
Yes.
My laptop is this HP Spectre X360 has a nice camera on it, 1080p, but the white balance is terrible. And I never realized it until I guess I have been wearing this blue shirt that came out as like bright purple. So I thought, okay, that's not going to work. So what I finally and it only took me about a month or so of doing various virtual panels that I decided, okay, the best camera I have is my phone. And this, at least I can put it on a tripod. I can put the Zoom app on it, Skype app on it. I've since bought this app, Droid Cam, I think, which lets me use it as an external camera for Zoom, which is one way to get around the other thing I should have done back in January, which was to buy a real Logitech web camera. There's this one that everyone recommends. It's been out of stock ever since, I guess, because many critical components are made out of unobtainium, and I don't know when I'm ever going to be able to buy that thing. So that's one thing.
Yeah, it's funny because I use a Logitech Brio camera, which is their 4K camera, which requires USB-C, by the way. It doesn't plug into because it requires the bandwidth to get the great picture. And I agree with you. I think what most people don't realize is that the web cameras in just about every notebook on the planet, not just Apple's notebooks, but all the Windows notebooks are fairly low resolution.
And nobody thought that much about the camera. It was just like, well, it's a good enough component. We'll take something out of the parts bin. Boom. Let's spend all our time on the keyboard or the screen or anything else that people will actually notice.
Mm-hmm. So the webcam is one thing, and obviously that needs to be corrected. And unfortunately, you're right. If you're trying to buy one right now, prepare to wait for a long time.
Yeah,
although there are a lot of Asian knockoffs that I see, which I haven't played with yet.
And I'm leery about that. When I see,
I'm leery about that. I know why you're leery, but go ahead, express your leeriness.
Well, multiple reasons. The fact that as the security in these things, how good is it? But also just when you're dealing with a no-name vendor, Amazon does not get enough scorn for how terrible their shopping experience can be. When you look for one thing and you see 10 other things from companies you've never heard of, from marketplace sellers you don't know, you really cannot trust the reviews by and large because there's so much gaming of them.
Right.
And it's bad. Like I've grown to appreciate Best Buy just because you're not in this endless archipelago of no-name vendors and suppliers and resellers. You at least know, well, okay, I'm buying it. I've heard of this company. It's from their inventory. And if I don't like it, I can return it.
Right.
But of course, they don't have any webcams themselves. So it's not much of it a real world advantage.
So webcams is one big thing. Any other hardware tips that you think?
So hardware, because I'm slow, I finally got around to replacing the chair I have had since like the late 90s. It's so long ago. I think it was before I bought a car, because I remember getting a taxi from Georgetown, this office supply store, to take it to my apartment at the time. And it was a comfy chair at the time, but it just started deteriorating, and basically I found myself leaning forward all the time and having an endlessly aching back. So I finally bought a used Aeron chair, which I am now sitting on, and it is quite comfortable. And I probably haven't finished adjusting it all the right ways, but yes, you should not go cheap on a chair. I mean, I was, because I bought this thing used. I didn't want to spend $1,300 on an office chair, but if you're going to spend this many hours a week in that, you should pay attention to that. Overall ergonomics, if you work in an office, presumably there's somebody there who will make sure your setup is positioned right. At home, it's up to you. So you really need to think and read and think, okay, are you seated so, your legs are parallel with the floor, and, your arms and your hands are just so, because it stinks when at the end of the day, you're like, I just need some medication. My back is killing me.
Right. Well, the other topic that, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, although you're not using, I don't see any, are you using any type of earbuds at all?
I am not. So I have a desktop USB microphone. I did buy that years ago after being on enough podcasts where people said, your audio is not good. Can you do something about it? And you don't need to go crazy buying some fancy microphone. Pretty much anything that plugs into your USB port and has its own, looks like a real microphone will make a big difference.
Yes. And my advice to people is, and it certainly happened to me, and I know it's probably true of your experience as well, is that I tend to spend 6-7 hours a day on Zoom calls, WebEx calls, on several Microsoft Team calls, and people will actually appreciate it if you have a better microphone. Even if you're not, of course, you and I do podcasts from time to time, and the audio recording is important. But, making sure that other parties can hear you, especially when you're on these calls with 25, 30 people. And I've been on calls like that, having a really, really good discrete microphone, I think, is a pretty important deal. And by the way, if you're working at home and you've got kids, it's a nice little way, especially if you've got over-the-ear headphones or you've got, earbuds.
You definitely want to make sure you have a home office door you can close and lock, whether it's a kid coming in. We did get a cat earlier this summer, and most of the time it's fine. Abel will just hang out in the lounge chair behind me and sleep in it. So I cannot take a nap in it anymore. It's been taken up by my coworker. But you want to make sure you can have at least some peace and quiet, and you're relatively isolated from the rest of the house.
Yep.
And the last thing I've done is actually just sort of decorate a little bit. I've put more things on the walls. I've yet to be rated on Twitter by the Rate My Skype Room Twitter account, but I don't want to, I want to at least look presentable when I'm doing a TV hit or whatever. And that means having something that looks relatively nice in the backdrop.
And I noticed on your back door too, and I have the same type, I'm using virtual wallpaper so you can't see it. And I did this on purpose, but on your back wall, it looks like you do exactly what I do, is you collect every single pass you have from every trade show you've ever gone to.
Our listeners,
I have a hook just like that.
There's got to be like 15 pounds of conference badges hanging from this hook on the door in my office closet. And like right now, this time we should be packing and getting ready to collect another badge from IFA in Berlin next week. But let's talk about that. I have that on my list. That you and I. That's how I met you, by the way, several years ago at IFA in Berlin at the wonderful Grand Hyatt.
I think it was at the Grand. Yeah, it was at the Grand.
Yeah, Grand Hyatt. I miss that place very much right now.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, the IFA events are great. You know, they really are a new show. Unlike CES, I mean, first of all, you get a different perspective of technology because you get it from a European perspective. CES tends to be very U.S. Focused, but it's unfortunate that this year's show, like so many other events, got canceled. There is going to be a virtual event. They've made a big deal of that next week. But what are your thoughts? And despite the fact that I know you're missing the German beer, which is, of course, very popular.
And the pretzels and everything else.
And the pretzels.
Yeah. So IFA, I mean, they are having a very scaled down real world show, basically modeled after the global press conference they do in the spring.
Yep.
And for a while they were saying, you were welcome, but wait to book your travel. And then a week or two ago, they sent this email: due to travel restrictions, i.e. because you are Americans and, our COVID response all over the world is not great. So I can't exactly blame them for having a travel ban. And so they said, we're sorry, we cannot accept you. We'll miss you very much. So yeah, I'm hoping that they will have, we can catch up on the press conferences and whatnot after they happen. Because for instance, the Cristiano I'm on keynote from Qualcomm CEO, that is, I think 3:45 Eastern time AM. So I would rather not get up that early. I mean, you at least, I guess, could just stay up late to watch it.
Oh, which is because I'm always up till 2 o'clock in the morning partying, as you know. So that's just right up my alley. No, you're right. It's gonna be a tough because they did not adjust the times to accommodate, and it's very hard to do that when you're in Europe to make it. You can't come up with a timing that makes everybody happy, regardless of where they live.
So this is
you're right, but their keynotes, by the way, they get some big hitters.
Like last year they had the guy from Huawei. We were sitting next to each other. As a recall, it was like, when is this guy going to talk about the whole security issue?
And I was very outspoken about that. I mean, I know you had concerns that you would think that would be the number one issue they talked about, but he completely ignored it, which is one way of handling a controversial issue. Just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, the Roku, Anthony Wood of Roku, he gave a great.
He did a nice job. He actually did a nice job of their European plans. Yes. So, so I've learned so far that you're not going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to see see their keynotes, but they will all be pre-recorded. They'll be recorded, and you'll be able to see that after the fact during normal times. In general, do you think CES obviously is going virtual this year, which is another
break a streak I've had since 1998.
I know. I share that Lou Gehrig track record with you. Do you think trade shows do come back? I mean, I know that
they have to. Yeah. I mean, so what I've realized from participating in panels at virtual events and watching other people's panels, you can sort of replicate the experience on a one-off basis. But the whole point of going to someplace, first of all, is to actually see the hardware that is coming out. I feel bad that as a tech journalist, pretty much the only time I've been able to check out new technology hardware is when I go to Costco and they have the huge display of TVs right at the entrance, and I can pause and see, okay, how cheap have 4K sets gotten? Do they have any 8K sets? The answer is no so far. Right. All the sort of usual hands-on time I get is just not there. The actual networking that goes on, it's hard to replicate. I've had there was one conference I spoke at virtually. They had a good Slack setup that sort of got it across. There was another one, Collision, this conference that happens in Toronto, instead happened online. And they had a virtual Irish pub, which is very nice. They FedExed me, the various drink mixings, and had a bartender from Ireland explain how to make these various cocktails. It was via Zoom with a small enough group of people. It was sort of like hanging out in the speaker's lounge at the end of the day, but it's hard to replicate that. And what's really hard to redo is that this is what you do. When you're at a conference, you have taken your other distractions out of the way. For me to sort of stay tuned into a Zoom conference all day long, when I'm at home, means I'm not doing chores. I am neglecting my family. I'm being fundamentally antisocial, and it's hard. And then you say, oh, I'll just watch this stuff later on. Well, I've got presentations from Black Hat was almost a month ago in Las Vegas, virtually, instead of in Vegas. Still haven't watched these things because I'll get around to it at some point.
Yeah.
So you actually need to have in-person events where the networking happens, the unexpected connections develop.
Well, and that's
we're
the
not
thing
going to
that
have the stupid pandemic forever.
Yeah. From your perspective, though, I would imagine that, let's face it, you cover the tech field, but when you're a journalist, much of the news that you uncover are in conversations over a drink, over lunch, that would not, it was said, something was said inadvertently. It's not going to happen during a prepared presentation, because those are all
cut off from a lot of what usually happens. Just figuring out who else should I be talking to in this field. Going to an event and seeing who is actually articulate and knows their stuff and is a good speaker on a panel. That's a great way to figure out who you should have been talking to all along.
Right. But you're optimistic that the trade shows are going to come back.
Some of them won't. I mean, it's, like CES, I think is fundamentally unkillable. People have been saying, single vendor events will take its place for forever. No, it's not. Most companies cannot be like Samsung or Apple. They can't just have their own splashy event and make everyone fly out there. Mobile World Congress, I think will be back because, there's lots of smaller carriers and app developers and whatever. They need some way to connect.
Right.
Something like South by Southwest, I think Austin as a city has got so much into that, and they make so much money off of it. I think the need and the motivation to bring it back are there. Yeah. Smaller things, I don't know. I think about, let's see, how many different events have I gone to that I'm not going to right now? Smaller events that, on the other hand, so one event which was still supposed to happen until like 3 weeks ago, the Competitive Carriers Association, this trade group of smaller wireless carriers, they have their annual gathering. I spoke at it last year, was in Providence, Rhode Island. This year was supposed to be in Amelia Island, Florida, and I was hoping for them to cancel it because Florida has not exactly gotten their hands around this pandemic at all. And that's a case where it's a lot of smaller companies. And so none of them are going to be able to have their own events. Right. So they probably need that more so than like MWC Americas, which does Verizon need that show to advertise what it's up to? I don't know.
Well, the trade show, phenomenon thing has been interesting. You've been going to it for years. And even before the pandemic, there's been a consolidation of trade shows over the last 20 years. I mean, there used to be Comdex that got blown up. Then you had CES that's stuck around. There was PC Expo.
Foisted that on other people when I was in a position when I had a chance to go, I guess.
Right. So I think the trade show thing, I think it will survive for exactly the reasons why you've outlined. But it's like many things after this pandemic. There's going to be a new normalcy in a variety of different areas. But let's talk a little bit about a piece that you just did on USA Today on COVID and the COVID exposure notification apps, and now that the API is alive and well with Apple and Google. Let's talk a little bit about that because, I want to get your 2 cents on it because it's still a very controversial topic with many people,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a technology portion and the capability of being able to execute it. And then there is are people going to opt into it because it really, these notification apps don't work if you don't have enough data to make judgment calls on it. So there's that privacy issue that a lot of consumers struggle with. So I want to get your 2 cents on that.
So in this case, it was actually an advantage to be staying at home this whole time because I was pleasantly surprised to see that my state, Virginia, had the first such app in the U.S. COVID-wise, shipped August 5th. So installed it the day it came out, and I haven't gotten COVID, so obviously it's working, right? I mean,
that's good. I checked the box there.
So it was refreshing to finally have one of these apps come out, put it on my phone and a couple of other ones for test purposes, and there's literally nothing to it. There's about maybe 3 buttons to check off, tap on the screen, and then you basically do not see it. It does its work in the background. It has, no permissions whatsoever. It is the most invisible app I've had on my phone ever. And hopefully it will stay that way. But you really do need something like this. It's not the only thing. I mean, these apps, they are dependent on multiple things. One is, as you said, will people install them? And, I don't know. You have to worry that the people who go out of the way to not wear masks in public because rah, 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 my freedom, they're definitely not going to put this app on their phone. And that's not helpful. But you also need rapid turnaround of tests. And right now we're not there. I keep hearing that we will get there, but obviously you got to do one of these things first. It is unclear what difference they will make. These apps, they've been around longer outside the US. Latvia shipped the first one at the end of May. And I don't have numbers on how many cases that has helped trace, but it certainly seems that these things could help. The actual cost to the user in terms of time spent installing it, data exposed, is nothing. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to a guy who developed one of these apps for Alabama, and he said, I was surprised by how little information we could touch. You cannot get it, your phone's GPS in this thing. We don't know what difference they'll make. I haven't seen numbers on that. I do know, so for instance, in Virginia, they said, I guess in the first week, they'd gotten to about 10% of the smartphone users between 18 and 65 in the state, which is good. The numbers I'd seen in terms of what makes an effective install base, Latvia had said about 20%, not to stop it, but to slow it. And this is all about degrees. You want to slow the spread, chip away at the problem, because I think as we've seen, there's no switch to flip. This is not going to go away immediately. I wish it would. It would make my life so much easier if it would, but that's not the world we live in.
I think, and I agree with all of everything you're saying, Rob. I mean, I think the concern I have is the human portion of it. Yeah. And and again, I don't have any scientific data to prove this, but I know most of the folks that I talk to, that are relatively tech savvy, even people who are not tech savvy, frankly. There's this reticence to. They understand the virtue of the technology. They understand the virtue of the capability. And I don't think it's a freedom thing. By the way, I think Apple users are probably a bit more open to considering it because Apple's done, I think, a better job of from a reputation standpoint of portraying themselves as being very focused. And I don't think it's just a perception. I think Apple in general has done a better job of espousing the virtues of protecting people's privacy and data, where Google, on the other hand, their reputation, let's face it, is a bit dicier with many people. And, what I struggle with is that if you can't get enough people to opt in, and these are all opt-in capabilities, it's garbage in, garbage out. I'm not so worried about, I'm not worried so much about the scenario where, you hear, oh, well, the app just told me that there's a bunch of people in MacArthur Park in San Francisco that may have been infected. And I just saw John Smith there. So I'm going to tweet all over the place that John Smith has COVID. Yeah, that could happen. Sure, it could. But I'm not sure that's the issue. That to me is kind of a Twilight Zone like portrayal of privacy at going amok, so to speak. I'm more concerned about the people is that people just are lazy, and they feel like, what, this thing is almost over, or that's the perception, and why should I opt in? So I think that's what I really struggle with.
It's interesting comparing Apple and Google, how they sort of, I guess, what sort of reputational damage or help they've given themselves. Because Apple has this privacy by design stance, and that they live it, they mean it, and so they have that trust. Google, on the other hand, there is some justifiable concern, but the apps are equally privacy preserving on both platforms. And to the point where one complaint I've seen health officials make is, we actually do want to know where people were, and you can't get that from these apps. You know, that if I were to be notified of an exposure, so I just checked, and then let's see here. I can see it. It says 54 checks in the past 14 days. If I were to get a notification that I had been too close for too long to somebody who tested positive, it would say the day, but not the location.
Right.
And so, and if I were to get that notification, I would then have to cross-reference that with my Google Maps location history. You know, where was I on that date?
Right.
And in Apple, if you use Apple Maps, you don't get that because there isn't that history. And so one point somebody made to me was,
I'm convinced the fear is the perception, the fear of the perception of fear is worse than the actual capability, because from an architecture standpoint, it's just that capability is simply not there. But people, you know, people don't believe it. And if they don't believe
it's complicated to explain. So my USA Today column is about 500 words. It should be quick to write. But in this case, I probably spent about an hour writing and rewriting these 2 or 3 paragraphs where I was breaking down. We have these anonymous Bluetooth keys. You exchange them with other phones. The phones compute themselves. You know, does this suggest you were near this other phone, i.e. person, for this long, this close? When that person tests positive, the keys go here, then there, and it's all, there's a lot of hand waving, and I'm still not sure I could explain it in, 2 minutes on the air. I would need a flow chart, a lot of slides, and people would be logging off, I'm sure.
And we all know that if it takes you that long to explain something, you've lost somebody.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and you sort of have to say, trust me, really, I've looked at it. I've talked to developers. The one I talked to in Birmingham, Alabama was, surprised at how little he could get at. If you write for this API, you cannot touch location. So that it's been done in the right way, but now it's up to us in terms of us smartphone users and us people coordinating testing who need to make sure that the turnaround is faster than it has been.
Right. There's a couple of other topics I do want to hit in the minutes that we have left. Let's talk a little bit about, can't avoid this, 5G, the new Apple 5G phones are supposedly coming. They're probably a few weeks away. Lots of speculation, but I think they probably will be introduced in the September timeframe. Are you going to be upgrading to 5G? That's the first question I ask anybody.
No rush at all.
So you're not going to upgrade. You're not going to make the big.
And I'm a T-Mobile user, so I should have it best off. T-Mobile, to sort of briefly recap a very complicated topic, there's 3 big flavors of 5G. There's the millimeter wave frequencies that Verizon only uses so far, which are really fast, but also have coverage of like 1,000 feet.
Right.
And that's not through walls, not even through trees. It's really brittle bandwidth.
You have to have line of sight. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's the low band stuff on the same frequencies as LTE. AT&T has that. T-Mobile has that. Verizon will have that. What T-Mobile has is mid-band spectrum that I got from Sprint, which is a nice compromise and in some ways the best case scenario, but that is also still slowly getting rolled out. And plus right now, the phones themselves, they're bigger than they should be. They cost more than they should. And just, no, I don't want to pay extra for that. So let's look forward to a year or so from now. Would you advise someone who's buying a phone right now not to buy a phone with 5G as a kind of a future? Yeah, I would say if 5G is like a free feature because you wanted the phone for the camera or the size or whatever, that's great. But it's just not worth paying extra for. And especially if it's on Verizon where millimeter wave is so limited.
Right.
And AT&T, AT&T doesn't even have coverage maps of their millimeter wave service. They say it's in parts of these cities, but no one really knows.
Right.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to walk up and down blocks And I know a friend of ours.
I think I read a piece the other day that during the pandemic, their rollout has been affected, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sure, yeah.
That's probably been a big problem. But to me, the interesting thing is this will be a tremendous test of Apple's brand loyalty. Because during a pandemic with people out of work, not working well, saving, people are saving money hand over fist at levels that have never been comprehended in U.S. history because people just are so uncertain of the future. I am sure these new Apple 5G phones will be in the $1,500 range. That's a lot of money.
No, I can't. I cannot justify that. I have a hard time spending that much on a laptop, and that one I'm probably not going to drop within the first week of having it. So
no, I don't disagree with you, but Apple again, they're almost in a class by itself, and you and I have shared stories with you that I like the experience of standing online at 5 o'clock in the morning because from a work standpoint, when you're on a line on an Apple store on the day of the announcement, when you could very easily just order it online and get it that day.
Why are we still doing this?
Why are we still doing this? But those people are diehards, and I have run into people where you're not sure if they even have a job, frankly, and they're rolling out $1,500.
This year they may not. We never know.
Well, we'll never know. So this is going to be to me a tremendous test of their loyalty. But putting that issue aside, I do think that 5G messaging of all the different carriers has been so over the top. It's going to take over the world, and I think that it's for a lot of people. First of all, I think that if you're going to make a decision to buy 5G, make sure you know what your carrier is going to be doing because it's so disparately different. From an implementation standpoint, Verizon has a better story with millimeter wave, like you said, but you're not going to get magical throughput for the most case on day one, even if you are with Verizon, unless you're in very close proximity to a 5G
I see this
tower.
as more of a 2021 story for a couple of reasons. Well, actually, probably three. One is the hardware themselves. The chipsets should get smaller, more compact, more energy efficient, which is good for your phones, their size,
less costly,
battery life. Two is frequency. The FCC just wrapped up a big auction of mid-band 5G frequencies. There are others coming later this year, early next year, which will mean other carriers will have mid-band service. The big unknown, and what would make all this hype worthwhile, is home broadband. If mid-band 5G lets you deliver speeds competitive with fixed broadband, wired, and either without a data cap or a data cap so high you don't actually run into it. So not like 100 gigs, but Comcast is now 1.2 terabytes, which is, not infinite, but a lot of people will not see that.
Right.
If 5G gives people a choice beyond Comcast or whoever the local cable monopoly is, that makes it worth the hype.
No, I think you nailed it. I think to me that is the interesting implication of 5G over time. Not now, of course, but a year and a half when the rollout is there and you are getting millimeter wave like performance, that you can replace that Comcast connection. You can replace that fiber optic connection. Now you will need a router, of course, that converts 5G signals to Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E, which is getting rolled out. But I think that will be the interesting, implication for the smart home and be able to get to a lower cost. Of course, if the data cap ceiling problems are overcome. Two topics I got to get your opinion on because it's in the news. TikTok.
Yeah,
I mean that. And, what do you think?
I really struggled to see why TikTok has become this huge problem. If you actually look at the data the app collects, it is really quite modest, meek even, I would say. It does not actually ask for your location. There are other ways you can get at it, but compare it to like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or any other social app, it is pretty light in its data requests. You can sign in with Apple on an iPhone, so they don't even have your email address. There is the issue of if you want to say, is the Chinese government sneaking around and using this app to collect data on all of us? They could just buy it. There's so many data brokers out there, in the ad industry, all the other apps. I don't see why this is a threat beyond all the other stuff on our phones. WeChat, the other app the Trump administration is targeting, yeah, that asks for a lot of stuff. And we know the Chinese government has used this to spy on dissidents. The security is not great. On the other hand, if you go to China for business, you need WeChat. It's sort of unavoidable.
Right.
But yeah, TikTok is no WeChat.
Yeah, I think it's important that you make that distinction, because they are two different animals in terms of the way data is being used. I myself personally think that and this is more of it's a political observation. I think the Trump administration is making this a big deal about TikTok, really to flex their muscles a bit in front of the Chinese, and saying, hey, you know what? We have the ability here to influence this big behemoth. And, we're literally going to order them to be acquired by,
it looks like it's going to happen. I mean, so do you think Microsoft will win this race? Or Oracle? What is Oracle doing buying a consumer app?
Walmart, of all things, Walmart is in the mix. I haven't watched the news in the last couple of hours, but that seems to me an odd.
Microsoft, I could sort of see, like Minecraft, that they know how to run a game that kids like. Walmart they're cool and hip are not words I would use, and Oracle is completely inexplicable.
Yeah, that's completely off the radar. I mean, that to me is like talk about a square peg in a round hole.
It's like an episode of the HBO Silicon Valley show.
Exactly.
When Hulu was buying Piper Chat, which worked out disastrously in the show.
No, yeah. So it's a very, very weird thing, but I think the WeChat thing, I certainly do agree with you, and I believe that there are some very valid concerns there, because the data captured there, obviously could have some really nasty implications if it ends up in the wrong hands. And like you said, if WeChat doesn't exist, that's a problem, to operate in China. So that's a problem. But
I should note, I do not have TikTok on my personal phone. That's mainly because I'm old and I am.
I would love to see a TikTok video from you. I would pay for that. That would be a paid opportunity.
To have me not be on TikTok.
Exactly. Last question before we end the podcast, because I know that you try to stretch out your hardware purchase as long as possible. It sounds like you're gearing up for maybe a possible Apple upgrade over time. Will you buy an iMac or a new MacBook with Apple Silicon? I mean, I know that's a hard question to answer right now, because there's not a lot of information out there beyond what Apple announced at their keynote about a month ago. But what's your thoughts on that? Will that hold you up, or are you going to let other people?
I think the performance promise of Apple Silicon, for what I use a computer for, seems legit. Being able to run iOS apps on that machine, that would be an advance. On the other hand, I'm also hoping, maybe without reason, that what I would like would be a Mac Mini with Apple Silicon, but also to catch up on all these features that you would think Apple would have by now. Why is there no Touch ID or Face ID on an Apple desktop? I use 1Password as my password manager. It's a Mac first app. It's so much better to use on my Windows laptop, because it works with Windows Hello to log me in.
Yes.
On my iMac desktop, I got to type in the password every single time.
Right.
It's dumb that Apple hasn't fixed that. So I'm hoping an Apple Silicon Mac Mini would have a Touch ID fingerprint sensor on the front or the top or wherever. I would like it to have Wi-Fi 6. That'd be nice. To not rip me off for storage, 256 gig SSD. Where do you even buy them in that small size these days?
No, I had this conversation with Dwight Silverman from the Chronicle the other day. Is that because he just bought the brand new Intel iMac, which is kind of the last of the Mohicans. That's of the old existing form factor, which is still actually a pretty nice unit. But that's Apple's MO. I mean, and that's one of the things you and I have talked about. We've talked about extensively when we were flying back from Berlin about a year ago, if I recall.
Yes.
That it just annoys me personally, because I'm the kind of person that I don't mind getting my hands dirty and upgrading. And upgrading Apple hardware is becoming harder and harder and harder. You know, and they charge exorbitant prices. If you want to go to 64 gig on a iMac, I think it's a couple $1,000 upgrade where you can buy the memory yourself for $600 bucks. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know? So
yeah, these are things, you know, we know Apple Silicon, it should make the machines cheaper for Apple, at least. Whether that's cheaper.
I really think that
is unclear.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, and then we'll just kind of close it here, is that, I'm wondering how, you know, they're going to be able to, they're obviously going to they have to roll out different iterations of Apple Silicon from a performance standpoint. Unlike an iPad or an iPhone, you know, you don't have a choice in terms of the speed of the CPU. There's one, you know.
It's the Apple way that you don't have to think about that.
Yeah, you don't have to think about it. But, you know, in a desktop or portable thinking mode, you know, most users, and I think this will be very difficult for Apple to change, is that when you buy a desktop or notebook, one of the decision criteria is how fast is that notebook? Do I need a 2 gigahertz, a 3 gigahertz? Is it an i5, an i7, an i9? We can thank Intel for creating that thinking with Intel Inside years ago. But I think there will be different versions and different speed bumps that they'll ultimately announce. I think the question will be, is what you talked about before, is from beyond performance, sheer performance. Okay, Apple Silicon runs better or faster than its Intel equivalents. The question is will I be able to run, you know, natively iOS apps on Big Sur, which will be
obviously will
advantage for a lot of people. A lot of people would love to run those apps unaltered. Developers will fall in love with that if they don't have to change the code dramatically.
Yeah. And of course, you know, will Intel specific apps, you know, run as well as they say on this Rosetta 2 translation layer? We'll have to see. I mean, it looked great in the demo, but everything looks great in the demo.
Wouldn't the irony be that Windows in some type of emulation mode runs faster on Apple Silicon than it runs on, I mean, we don't know if that's possible or not, but who knows, you know, I mean, one of the reasons why I like using Parallels is I can have the best of both worlds, and it actually runs pretty quickly, frankly, depending on how fast your iMac is. I wouldn't use it for gaming, but for general productivity applications and maybe some very light video editing applications, you know, Parallels works just fine. But if they're able to, whether it's Parallels or whether it's Apple able to figure out to run, you know, natively Windows in a very efficient way on top of an Apple Silicon platform, that will be very interesting to see.
Yeah, we'll have to see, because I am so old. I remember when Apple came out with the Power PC, their thing is, now we have enough processing power, you can emulate Windows and it's okay. But in fact, soft Windows was not that okay to use. It was adequate if you needed to like fact check how something looks in Windows. But for day-to-day productivity, fun is not the memory I have of trying that out.
Well, I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but this is you know how you can always send that the podcast is over, is my Nito Robotics robot vacuum is now
that's what it is
vacuuming in my place. So that's a sign for me to tell you thank you for participating in today's podcast. You and I will be in touch after the fact. Thanks to the entire Moor Insights audience for listening to today's podcast. Please follow us on our usual social media suspect partners. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week.